advertised that we would start at 2:15, but people were still kind of filing in, and so I think I'm going to make an introduction of Rhonda, if I can. And if you look in your meeting booklet that you had, there's an awfully good introduction about Rhonda. And I would like to tell you that I've called her the premier cowgirl of Weston County. But she's really not. I mean, she's the premier cowgirl of Wyoming and probably of the United States. I mean, her legacy goes beyond Weston County to the state and to the national cowgirl activities. And I don't have much of a knowledge of what that means, but she is a premier cowgirl, and we're very proud of Rhonda to be here. Rhonda has spoken to Weston County Museum District and others interested to hear her presentations, and they're always just wonderful. I mean, the history and her life, she's going to share with you today a great deal. And so we're very privileged to have her, and we have a Wyoming Historical Society shirt that I'm going to present to Rhonda before her talk, because I think it is very apropos for her.
Wow.
So Rhonda, it says well-behaved women rarely make history. So you're making history today, and
God bless you. Thank you so much.
You don't have to behave yourself.
What
you just
a wonderful thing. Well, I haven't behaved myself very well today. I've been in all sorts of trouble already, and that's just norm for me. And you know, I think that there's always some mischief in your family before you come along, and I had some grandmothers and a great-grandmother that were fond of teasing and joking and just making little funny jokes. And so I think that what happens is that if we become old enough to have some experience, the next thing you know, the Historical Society calls upon you to talk about something. So, so I am going to speak to you today on the subject of cowboys and cowgirls of the Cheyenne River. And I have my book here as a prop about the Bronx Steamboat. This is the horse that's on our Wyoming license plates, as you all undoubtedly know. And there were a lot of bucking horses like that in the early days that were snubbed and held down, and cowboys and cowgirls climbed on. I love to research rodeo from the 1800s, and it's another amazing thing to research. And I was so privileged that my husband, who grew up on a tributary to the Cheyenne River, learned to ride bareback and saddle broncs when he was a teenager in high school, went to national high school competition, and then became a world champion senior pro saddle bronc rider, and was still riding when he was 67. And his last world championship saddle was won in 65, and he was born in 40. So pretty proud of that, and that's why his picture is here. I'm excited to speak on the topic of cowboys and cowgirls of the Cheyenne River. But I want to say howdy, and that we're honored to have you all visiting our beautiful corner of the state. We call this where the sagebrush meets the jack pines, because we merge into the Black Hills. And we practice the cowboy tradition of friendliness, and I hope you've felt it since you've been here. The face of this town has changed a lot since the horses of Cheyenne River cowboys and cowgirls waited where they had been tied to hitching posts and rails alongside the 3-block Main Street, which was about from here, where our courthouse is, down 3 blocks. That was it. So that's how it was when the cowboys rode in here on their horses, and that's where they tied them up. The most important, totally absent historical site that pertains to my subject is a railroad stockyards and loading chutes, which was located south of the present railroad tracks on the left side of Main Street, if you were going down, before you come to what we call Stampede Street. And it's after the second stoplight, I believe. So thousands of cattle, undoubtedly many trailed into town by Cheyenne River Cowboys and Cowgirls, have been shipped to market across many decades from those pens and sidings. And another quick fun fact is that Toomey's flour mills were located next to that railroad. They provided great cowboy grub through their famous flapjack flour. And it bared the signature smile of a young cowboy with a bandana around his neck and a fork in his hand and a stack of flapjacks with syrup on top, anticipating his meal. So there was a huge sign there along the railroad tracks when I was a kid with that little boy advertising Toomey's Mills and flapjack flour. I hope you have walked or have opportunity to walk the beautiful historic trail that is along Stampede Street. It turns at that second stoplight and goes that way out toward our fairgrounds. And when you get almost to the fairgrounds, you will find almost life-size statue of a cowboy on a very colorful horse trailing a couple of longhorn cattle. And that's just before you enter our Weston County Fairgrounds. And then if you come back up that street, once you've crossed the bypass, Highway 16, you will see on that side of the road that winding cement walk, which one of our historic cowgirls from a Perino ranch here that has generational cowboys, she is a great historian, wish she could have been here today, but she laid that out and had that cement poured right where the trail was that all those cattle that were shipped into this rail track and trailed out to the country or were brought to town to be trailed, they had carved it into the soil enough that it was embedded, and she laid that winding sidewalk along there. And the Arboretum has planted flowers along it and it has markers all the way, but that's a very interesting point of our history that you might want not to miss while you're here. So then, if you look at the Weston County Fairgrounds, if you had looked back out that way, beyond where that horse and rider that are fiberglass there are, that would be an area where the earliest broncs were ridden. And I forgot to bring a photo that I had by Weinbrenner, which was dated 1902. And it shows, it's called Just a Little Mix-Up, and it shows a cowboy that's been bucked off a horse, and his hat has flown high into the air, and you can see that two horses are down, and there's one man standing there, the hat's in the air, you can see part of another man, but hardly, so the horse obviously went end over tea kettle, and this guy came in to drag the guy out from underneath and hope he hasn't been pawed and stomped. So those were cowboy carry-ins on in the early years. They just loved to ride broncs and see what they could do. And that's almost at the location where our Weston County Fairgrounds is now. And hundreds of cowboys over the years have ridden broncs there. My family was able to help improve the bucking chutes. My husband, who's this bronc rider here, built a lot of them with the help of the FFA boys, welded pipe, and then taught and gave bronc riding lessons to some of our young students and coached them and took them to high school rodeo. So that's all just part of the background. Now, to my subject. It's time to introduce you to the pioneers of this region who developed the ranches along the Cheyenne River. Their generations, cowboys and cowgirls, have and continue to responsibly protect and improve rangelands and livestock. I am sincerely honored to have been asked to tell you about those. In somewhat chronological order, they include the 4W Ranch founder, Lynn Sherwin, Arthur, Art, and Grace Montgomery, the Shook families, Anthony Wilkinson, A.W. Sedgwick, whose parents immigrated from Yorkshire, England, as did the Rumneys, whose names you'll hear later. Anthony's wife was Paulina Dorothea Thompson Sedgwick, whose parents immigrated from Germany. W.I. Red Bennett came from Texas, Mike Coy and wife, Bessie Blanche Compton, came from the Missouri Ozarks via Montana. Then Lynn Sherwin Sr., Mysterious Bill Pressler, 4W Bill, Miles Spencer, Walt Rumney's wife, and Joe Rumney. Also Leonard Thompson, Bus Sedgwick, and wife Helen Petty Sedgwick. Joe and Marie Kane, Chris Christensen and wife, William Wallace Stearns and wife, Evelyn Daly Stearns, Violet May Coy and husband Cecil Donaldson, Lynn Sherwin and wife, Ronald and Mame Cornelison, Gus and Lona Sherwin, and Jim Sherwin, also Jean Sherwin, and one generation of McGee's who chose a ranch site just south of the Cheyenne River. L.T. Bus Sedgwick and wife, Helen Marty Sedgwick, Francis Sedgwick and wife, Violet Coy Sedgwick, Kit Greaves, Ronald Cornelison, Ethel Finn Coy and Loyal Coy, Dwayne McGee, Ruth McGee. Another generation includes Joe and Marie Kane's 7 sons, Donald Spencer and his wife, Clara Sedgwick Wilson, Fred Wilson, Franklin Mankey, who was a national high school rodeo champion all-around cowboy in 1952, Frances Marie Sedgwick Martin, and L.T. Lenny Sedgwick, who went to the National High School Rodeo a couple years later than that and did well. Ann Kara Sedgwick, William Allen Stearns, Rhonda Sedgwick Stearns, Bill and Tom Christensen, Leila and Jim Coy, and younger siblings, Frank and Steve, Lonnie Wilson Farella, Billy Wilson, and on down. Through more generations still dwelling here and contributing to the economy of this region by raising beef, and a lot of them are involved with rodeo as well. If I was a good gambler, I bet the same families will live and work here into future generations, doing their best to be good citizens and good neighbors. That's what happens when we have been taught to revere our past and preserve its history and traditions. How did those Cheyenne River forebears live? What were their thoughts? What work filled their days? Did they accomplish it when a few of the 24 remained for them to get some rest? Not sometimes in the spring when it was calving, times when the mud was bad and they were stuck somewhere. The Cheyenne River heads in Converse County along a drainage coming from the south end of the Rochelle Hills. Little Thunder, Big Thunder, and Lodgepole Creeks eventually merge in the Upper Cheyenne. That accumulates runoff from north and south to become the main Cheyenne River, which crosses into Weston and Niobrara counties and eventually into South Dakota around the town of Edgemont. Good land that's been home to horses, livestock, cowboys, and cowgirls since the late 1870s and early 1880s. And at this point, I want to bring to your attention that marvelous map. I was just elated that our local Natural Resources Office so kindly and generously printed out that large map for us, showing all of the drainages in Weston and Niobrara counties. So feel free to examine that when the talk concludes or anytime you want to.
Rhonda, could I just mention one thing?
Yes.
She's talking about the Cheyenne River, and we're envious of Niobrara and Converse County because they have the more sections of the Cheyenne River.
Yes, they do.
And Rhonda pointed out to me that this is the section of the Cheyenne River that's in Weston County.
Yep.
And all of this other stuff is what she's talking about, is drainages down
all the drainages
to the Cheyenne River. It starts in Converse County and ends up in eastern, or in western South Dakota.
So we really, have a very minimal portion of it, and some of the ranches that I'm talking about lay right along that boundary and slop over from Niobrara into Weston, like the 4W and the Fiddleback, and some of those big old historic ranches were laid in both sites. And thank you for pointing that out. Now, having given you the genealogy and introduced the ancestors of the Cheyenne River, it is my solemn responsibility to make sure you understand the kind of chameleon or changeling she truly is and can be. Ancient mythology sometimes attributes spirits, good or evil, to rivers. The Cheyenne's good side manifests in abundant water for livestock, even some for irrigation in the right times and places. Drinks are gratefully grabbed by hot cowboys and cowgirls, parched enough to lie down on their belly and sip it, straining sand through their teeth, or try capturing enough to sip from in their cupped hand, and try to drink downriver from their horses. No, upriver from their horses. But do beware, if any experienced cowboy or cowgirl ever mentions places where quicksand might be encountered after the river has run high. Everyone who ever discovers such information knows to make a definitive mental note of the location to share with any newcomer to the region, as well as reminding themselves to always remember and always avoid those places, no matter what. That is the Cheyenne's evil side, which slithers quietly along as quicksand, eager to swallow whatever she can that doesn't exercise sufficient caution. She burps through the bubbles of last escaping air from the lungs of bovine, equine, human, or wildlife as they enter eternity. An equally dangerous hazard the Cheyenne River Cowboys and Cowgirls are generationally aware of are what we call boggy spots. And they're usually not near the water. Sometimes you find them right past the tops of ridges. But they're a grayish, charcoal, dry-looking soil. Probably not much grass grows there. And it somehow has a capacity to trap and hold moisture, similar to the bentonite that we see around Upton. And it turns into a boggy substance underground when moisture accumulates there. And that grabs anything that foolishly steps there and holds on like a suction cup. Horses and cows panic as their hooves begin to sink and are held fast. They stand and tremble, and an athletic rider might take a wild leap off to solid ground and hang on to their reins, but they're still endangered by the horse's thrashing head and hooves. Worse, the panicked horse may see the cowboy's body as a possible bridge to escape and just climb right on top of him. Such grayish areas hold red flags of warning for all experienced cowboys and cowgirls of the Cheyenne River. And my husband and I and other people I've been with have experienced both of those things at various times, and probably as frightened as I've ever been with horses have been particularly in the boggy places, because I always listened really well about the quicksand, but people weren't as likely to tell you about the boggy places because they were much more frequent, found much more frequently. Excuse me. The leaders, Lynn Sherwin, father of the aforementioned Sherwin brothers, was among the earliest to bring a trail herd of southern cattle northward to call the Cheyenne River drainage we speak of home, offering abundant water, nutrient-rich native grasses, and shade from huge old cottonwood trees. It may have seemed like heaven to a trail-weary herd. They flourished and multiplied, continually improved by their kind and diligent stewards. The leaders of those wanderers recuperated from the long trail and gained weight on the abundant forage. Hot weather cured the soft green grass into an even stronger protein source. And some innate sense caused their slick hides to begin growing longer and thicker hair. The oldest, wisest leaders might have experienced some winters along the trail, especially when crossing high country. There, they would have learned to seek low places, running transverse to the prevailing winds. That memory probably caused them to seek the widest parts of deep draws that ran down to the river from the highest land towards the south and north of its course. The Wyoming brand 4W is old to this region. The best information I have is that it originated in Texas and came here on the hides of longhorns, driven northward for weeks, maybe months. The first my family heard about old 4W Bill was that cowboys trailing a herd that started in Texas had stopped where the 4W ranch was founded, with him riding in their chuck wagon. They said he had wandered into their camp somewhere along the way, his few clothes tattered, his body emaciated. They doubted if he was more than 3 years old. I met him when I was exactly that age, and he was in his 90s. Dad picked him up at a boarding house in Sundance, Wyoming, and took him out to eat steak with us. I was 3, and 4W Bill and I both ordered milk to drink, because those cowboys said they didn't have any milk. They were trailing a steer herd. They cooled a cup of coffee, thinned it with water, and gave it to him to drink. The canned cream had all been used. But I suppose a boiled potato smashed down probably tasted like manna from heaven, because he was nearly starved to death. And I had no idea anything of his background until a long time ago, in the 1990s. It's funny how history just comes along and sometimes just opens up a door to you and you go, oh, thank you, God. I never thought I'd know that. It was the mid-1990s, and a couple from Colorado came from Newcastle to compete in the 60s age division of a senior pro rodeo that my husband and I were helping put on here, and he was competing. And she saw Bill Stearns with a local address on the rodeo program, and then she heard and saw me yelling for him while he was riding his bronc, and she came to where I was seated and said she had a question she hoped I might answer. I told her I'd be happy to if I could. She said, do you know of a 4W ranch, darn these teeth, anywhere in the area? I told her yes, wondering why she asked me that. The reply was that her dad, Colorado rancher Bill Hilscher, had many years earlier been told by a very elderly cowboy friend about a time he had hired out on a trail drive from Texas to Wyoming. Their destination was a 4W ranch on the Cheyenne River. The cowboys said they'd been on the trail for a long time when they bedded the stock and camped one night, waking up the next day to find a, quote, skinny, filthy, bedraggled kid that didn't look a day over 3 years old, curled up on the wagon seat. So that is confirmation. He had a tattered shirt, big enough for an adult, wrapped around him. His little feet were between bloody and thickly calloused. His ribs were showing, his eyes sunken. And as soon as they awoke, he started begging them not to hurt him or chase him away. And I think I told you about them giving him the scrambled eggs, so I probably repeated that. Years ago, searching the Wyoming archives in Laramie, I found the 1880s photos portraying longhorn cattle branded with the 4W. And the earliest brands were recorded in 1909, and the Sherwins could have registered their brand in Colorado before they came here, or they might have only registered it here when they came. Jean Sherwin Sears Harshbarger and her descendants still own and raise cattle on that same 4W ranch south of Newcastle, and they still use the brand. They have also preserved some of the ranch's original buildings.
In addition to the weekly printed version of the newsletter journal, we also promote our community and share important information on our award-winning website, newslj.com, and in our weekly email newsletter, Nuke Now. We also connect with readers through various social media platforms and invite you to check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can even take a look at a recent meeting of the City Council, School Board, or County Commission on our YouTube channel. We do hope that you will go to newslj.com and subscribe today, and we look forward to making all of our great content available to you. But regardless of your level of support, we thank you from the bottom of our hearts for doing your part to preserve a free and independent local press.
They have also preserved some of the ranch's original buildings, and it is recognized as a Wyoming Centennial Ranch. To me, Jean Sherwin Harshbarger is the queen of the Cheyenne River Cowgirls. Given her rich cowboy genetics and the many hundreds of miles she's covered on the back of a horse, and the things experience has taught her about that area and everything on it, no living cowgirl I know of can surpass her in what she knows about the forage, the wildlife, the streams, the river, and everything that lives there over a large area. Her grandfather Sherwin and parents were excellent stewards of the grassland. She continued the tradition, as have her descendants who live on parts of the original land and have expanded their own holdings. I call Jean one tough cookie because she's now in her 90s, but with fewer wrinkles on her face than me, and recently took an unfortunate fall that resulted in a broken ankle and a broken wrist. She's not able to take much pain med because her heart's not good. So there she is in the hospital, bright as can be, sits up if you come to visit. Oh, sign my book and look at these pictures from the ranch the kids just bought in. I don't know how she can be that strong, but riding hundreds of miles across her land from the time she was a child with parents and uncles and cousins, and then since with children and grandchildren, and now great-grandchildren, she's put in more miles than she might be right up there with 4W Bill, because she's gone back and forth over such large areas. So she asked her husband Bob and grandson Chad to bring me some albums showing ranch work on the 4W. I hope I didn't forget those also in my car or somewhere. I thought we left them in here this morning. Dr. Jordan, did I?
I didn't see any others.
Dang it. That's awful. Gail's not here.
Yeah, I am. Do you want me to run?
Could you run get those? They
Yeah.
must be.
Where?
They could be on the seat in my car, or else they would have to be right there by the door.
Do you have
I
the
so
key?
much would
The car?
want you to have.
Yeah, key just in case it's locked.
It's not locked and the key's in it.
Oh,
So just thank you. That would. I'm mortified. I forget so many things anymore. I hope that she will find those because you really need to see them. It's hard for me to even mention my husband, Bill Stearns, and myself as a Cheyenne River Cowboy and Cowgirl, so near to the name of 4W Bill and Jean. And we were privileged to follow a lot of his tracks for some years when we did day work for employees up and down and north and south of the Cheyenne, because they need extra help in the busy years. And my husband and I kept daily records. He had a cow book always in his pocket, and I had a diary. And through our best calculations, we figured we'd ridden 150 to 200 to 300 miles across many working seasons, but that was a drop in the bucket to the old Cheyenne River Cowboys and Cowgirls. And our faithful cow dogs followed us. A lot of days running to cool themselves in the river whenever we came near it. I'm so sorry Jean is still hospitalized and not able to be here to meet you. But on my most recent visit to her, she shared a little of her cowgirl history. I had to coax and coax while she waved my questions off with, oh, that didn't really amount to much. She is the one who has ridden 1,000 or more miles along Cheyenne River country. Horseback since she was a child. Trekking grass, cattle, windmills, the saddle horse herd. And I heard years ago about her and a ranch neighbor trailing their market-ready 4W cattle to Dewey, South Dakota, which was the nearest loading pens and railroad cars for cattle in one day. Now, I don't know if the dot for Dewey is still on the map, but I've always heard it was at least 30, or not 35 miles from the 4W ranch. So I said to Jean, didn't you and Bird Lynch trail those 4W yearlings to Dewey alone in one day? Oh yes, she said with a smile, recalling the ride. That wasn't too much. We gathered them the day before and put them in a pen at the south end of the ranch. But we left really early in the dark. Laughing, she said, it could have been dark for a while before we saw the lights from the Dewey stockyards. And there could have been a few miles from seeing the lights to being there. And in cowboy lingo, that's a can't see till can't see day.
They're not in that bag, are they?
Could it be that bag behind you?
Oh my
The last one?
Let's hope. Let's hope.
Did you bring that?
This is just the tape, Gail.
Okay.
What about the black bag?
Nope, that's my black.
That's
bag.
it.
Okay, well, I can run up there and be about,
If you would.
I'll be back about 15 minutes probably.
You can be back at 10. Betcha.
Okay.
I think they're about there.
Okay for the ticket.
Anyway, my dad always talked about the old cowboys saying, you know, we had a can't see till can't see day. And then he said, I remember one old cowboy down here on the Cheyenne River that said, if you go to work for that outfit, you just as well trade your bedroll for a lantern. And that's almost how it was with the work that was to be done for all of these Cheyenne River cowboys and cowgirls. They went to bed so late and got up, you know, you just never see daylight, it seems like, until you've been up for a long time. But Jean said they didn't think anything of it. And as I was saying, we trailed cattle 35 miles to a government pasture spring and fall from our place to the northern end of the Rochelle Hills when I lived on Mush Creek west of town. And it was a day and a half, most of 2 days going over in the spring, but the calves were fairly small. And unless the weather's really cool, and even if it is, you just can't go very far, and you have to stop and let them rest, and then you go another few miles. And if we made 15 miles the first day, it was pretty good. And then coming back in the fall, and the grass was green going over, and the cows all had to stop and graze. And coming back in the fall, the calves were bigger, but it still took us, you know, a day and a half to 2 days going over, and better than a day coming back with those cattle. So Jean's saying, I said, you know, your dad wouldn't have liked you to keep those yearlings in a trot. And she said, you know we didn't. We knew better than that. But she just thought that it was a very normal thing. Then, Jean said, if you're giving that talk, I just want you to tell them about all the strange happenings at the ranch and in the old bunkhouse. You're going to tell them that, aren't you? And I said, well, are you serious? Should I? I asked, amazed. Well, you know it's part of our 4W ranch industry, she responded with deep seriousness. So, here we go. I'm leading you into the paranormal world. You can be shocked and unbelieving. Just listen. I've told you of those first buildings, still standing and kept in good repair on the 4W ranch. If you've ever been there and seen the old bunkhouse or toured, raise your hands. Anybody been there at all? None of you? I'm disappointed. You have, of course, yes, bless your heart.
Yep.
Yeah, and Doc has, and I thought you had. So, you know, it's wonderful that they have preserved those old buildings, which is great. But Jean is just bubbling with enthusiasm, and it's just so wonderful to talk to her. So, these are things that Jean and her family have known for decades, sharing among family members and close friends who are trustworthy. Listen carefully. A friend visiting the ranch a few years ago with one of Bob's sons dashed into the house one day, excitedly inquiring, who is that old cowboy with the big hat and droopy gray mustache who just went galloping past the yard fence? and disappeared down beyond the bunkhouse. Now this was a few years ago. Everyone in the room looked shocked. And Jean said, "Our saddle horses are out in the pasture, and none of us have been riding." Well, this friend said he was wonderful. He looked like something out of a movie. I couldn't take my eyes off of him. The others looked questioningly at each other. They knew no neighbors were expected, and certainly none of them looked like that. Then the questioner looked up above a long row of photos on Jean's dining room wall and gazed at the end photo and said, "Oh, he's in that picture right up there. And that is this picture. And this is 4W Bill. And these are other men who were riding there. This is probably Tommy No, uncle to the Fordyce family that lives various places in Weston County. This, I believe, is the Bill Hilscher who told his daughter that he was working on the 4W and met 4W Bill, or that was where he heard about it. And this is a herd of the cattle after they had begun to crossbreed. You can see a few longhorns in there, but there's Herefords, then there's horses, probably the saddle horse bunch. They're probably trailing those cattle. And this is probably 4W Bill on the paint horse there. But he was in his 90s, as I said, when I met him. And it wasn't long after he quit working at the 4W. So she said, "That's him." Silence reigned and asked, "Won't you tell me who he is?" So she just saw him right out there. Guests were often housed in the old bunkhouse, which the Sherwin family continues to preserve in excellent condition. The same 4W Ranch visitor was sleeping out there when she was awakened around daylight by the rapid tap, tap, tap of someone's boots with jingling spurs, going quickly down a hall behind a wall from her. She had jumped up and dashed through doors and rooms until she had seen it all. No one was there. I got chills when I heard that she identified the roughly 50-year-old photo of 4W Bill on the wall, and was even more awestruck when I heard her say that. Because in the early years, Mom and her first husband, Cecil Donaldson, often went to help with 4W cow work during the busy seasons. They slept in that bunkhouse. Mama walked fast wherever she went. I also had an early photo of her wearing boots and spurs, and was shocked at how small her feet had been. Everyone in this audience who knows me knows I'm a practical, black and white, fact-based individual who's not at all given to fantasy. But I believe she got up early in the morning, hurried out in the dark to saddle her horse with the rest of the cowboys, and so that's a mystery of the old 4W Ranch. And another joke, a joke, instead of a mystery this time, about that bunkhouse. The Sherwins, early on, had hired a little cook who came from England. And she had immigrated over here and was living in Newcastle, and she was elderly, and she was a really good cook, and she cooked some restaurants around town, and they had eaten some of her food, and they said, "We need a ranch cook. We'll pay you a lot more money than you're making in these restaurants. And if you will come out to the ranch and cook for us." So she said, "Okay." And they'd send her shop for groceries, or they'd bring her groceries, and she'd say, "Oh my goodness, what am I going to do with all these groceries? You've got enough here for months." And she scolded and scolded, and Mr. Sherwin said, "I want my cowboys to eat well. I'm going to work the tail off of them all day long, and they're not going to come home for lunch. So you feed them a good breakfast." Well, she said, "I fed my children in London on 3 cents a day, and there's no sense wasting this oatmeal." So Earl Lynch, he was a character. He got up real early, and he came out there, and he got a kettle. and he got a pan and a tea kettle, and he jerked the tea kettle off the stove, and he had it in one hand and the kettle in the other, and he was pouring hot water into it, and then he had an oatmeal box, and he was trying to get some oatmeal in it, and Mrs. Williams had him by the sleeve, and the two of them were dancing all over the kitchen, and she said, "I fed my children in London on 3 cents a day," and Laurel said, "By God, you're not feeding me for that. Give me that pan." So Mom said she hurried out to the saddler horse, because she said they were leaving a trail of hot water all over. She never knew how that came out. So, after Jean talked about those paranormal things, then she said, "You know, we've sure been having some terrible grassland fires, and they've destroyed valuable haystacks." And she and I discussed the high price of hay to replace those losses, and with the spirit of all ranchers, and certainly every Cheyenne River cowboy and cowgirl, she laughed. "Thank goodness the calf prices are really high this year. Things usually level out that way in the long run." About that time, my poor memory jogged me to say, "Oh, I was about to forget your youngest daughter, Elena. Wasn't it around Prescott, Arizona, where she moved and went into breeding and training some exotic horses?" Jean nodded with a smile. "Yes, Elena still breeds, trains, and exhibits those Peso Fino horses she became fascinated with." She added, "Keeping so busy with all of that, she seldom finds time to write or call. There's another Cheyenne River cowgirl, and she's gone exotic. That's an elegant, beautiful, intelligent equine breed that comes from Andalusia, and I love everything I've learned about them. So the Cheyenne River Cowboys and Cowgirls have cast a long and wide loop into the world." The home of Jean and husband Bob Harshbarger is at the original ranch site. Jean's daughter Nikki and husband Terry Gronewold steward their portion of the old 4W down the Cheyenne River a few miles to the south. Jean's grandson Chad Sears, wife Jill, and cowgirl daughter Lainey own and operate the northern part of the 4W ranch, as expanded by Jean and family. More generations of Cheyenne River cowboys and cowgirls. Still further toward the headwaters of the Cheyenne River is the historic Fiddleback Ranch, recognized as a Wyoming Historic Site. It is now owned and operated by the Ty Checkett's family, who generously hosted a bus stop on one of our former Historical Society tracks. Although not generational residents of the area, they ranch there now and revere its history, as their days of ranch work make tracks in Cheyenne River sand. Their preservation of the original 1880s buildings, including a wool shed and a combined bunkhouse, cookhouse, with the original logs in great repair, is commendable. They also maintain the cable crossing swing, which can be used by one person to cross the Cheyenne River back and forth when it's at flood stage, and inundates the cement crossing on the road, which conveniences vehicles when the river is running low. Such preservation is essential to making history available for the future. The good neighbor tradition of trading work from ranch to ranch and going to the aid of neighbors whenever they're in need is practiced in the rural West today, whether fire, flood, birthing of babies, human, bovine, or equine. Cowgirls and cowboys brave blizzards, blistering heats, hailstorms to give aid to those who live near enough to send a message needing help. There is one more thought, perhaps a cowboy precept, that my heart compels me to express to you before I close. I've given the matter considerable thought, and you're so gracious I feel sheepish for expecting you to sit here a little longer, simply to indulge a whim of mine. Yet I really cannot find closure or feel I've successfully represented these generations of cowboys and cowgirls of the Cheyenne River until I fulfill the duty of making certain our wonderful present and future representatives know this most important precept. Who you are, how you look, what you know, how many years of experience you have, how many cows or horses or acres you own, how far or how close your place is to town, do not make you a good or bad cowboy or cowgirl. The truly important things: honesty, empathy, goodness, kindness, willingness to help a human or animal in distress, willingness to admit being wrong if it's proven that you were, always keeping your word if you give it, and looking someone in the eye and shaking their hand with a good solid grip whenever you do that, give proof of all real cowboys and cowgirls. Little feet always follow our boot tracks. And in my recent visit with longtime friend Joyce Bain, a ranch-reared daughter of another aforementioned Cheyenne River cowboy, now happily occupied with visiting grandchildren from back east around the Black Hills, was just coming out of the hospital after I visited Jean. I knew that her dad, Clyde Bain, had brothers who also were raised on the ranch and moved away, and she gave me their names, Robert and Harry. And she said she couldn't be here for the talk because she was busy showing her visiting grandchildren from back east around the Black Hills. And I stopped to wonder if our old Cheyenne River might not instill a genetic homing instinct in the hearts and minds of the descendants of all Cheyenne River cowgirls and cowboys, causing them to return here time to time. I pray that is true, so they'll continue to revisit their generational homeland, maintaining their family connections, history, and legacies for as long as the world turns. And 4W Bill was so impressive to me when I met him when he was old that I decided I would write a little poem about him because I had visited his gravestone in Newcastle so many times. 4W Bill, that's what's scratched on this headstone. Just a plain old rock of brown. In a lonely cemetery in a little Wyoming town. As I stand here with these flowers, his face is fuzzy in my brain, yet I can see his Rochelle Hills, 40 miles distant through the rain. If I lift my eyes and face the west, yep, he loved those hills. I hope you know, 4W Bill, as I leave these flowers here, how I wish that I could know much more of your history, much more of your life. But at least, you know, I care. And I also had I really think I got the wrong version that I was reading to you here, but I wrote another poem about that region. That it's always, when I began to write poetry, it was always the things that moved me most, that caused me to, and so it's a Wyoming poem, and some of you were on treks that heard that. What is it, my Wyoming, that makes me love you so? You seem just like my mother, as precious as pure gold. You beckoned my ancestors from homelands here and there, and they found you unforgiving, yet always fair and square. Raw gashes cut you deeply. Each time death breaks my heart, and only when you hold them can both our healing start. Puppies, horses, dad and mom, now spirits be above. After we honor their earthbound clay, you fold them close with love. And so, my dear Wyoming, I thank you for all this. I rode up on this hilltop in hopes you'll catch this kiss. Wyoming, I love you. I'll welcome your questions.
The new store. This is the one-stop shop. We have a pharmacy. We have a bootlegger's liquor. The deli, the food that you can get at a lunchtime is so amazing. The coffee shop. Certain Friday mornings, there's 30 people sitting here in all these chairs. This is the hub for people to come and visit, have their coffee, have their donut. It's amazing what this area has done. Totally amazing.
I'll welcome your questions. And the 4W Bill story has just always fascinated me. And my dad for years, it was 4W Bill, and then it was 4W Bill Pressler. And so we got to wondering, and my dad kept track of him, and he'd come to Newcastle, and he'd see him in town, and he'd ask, come out to the Antlers, I'll buy you a steak, and give you a little cash. And he always kind of would spend it on a jug of whiskey if he got too much cash, but Dad would put a good steak in him if he could. And so anyway, I said to Dad, after I began to learn about 4W Bill, I said, well, where did he get that name Pressler? And Dad said, well, you know, he took up with that widow woman that lived over across the railroad tracks, and she had a room, and so he was boarding there because it was cheaper than staying at the Antlers. And she cooked for him, and he liked her cooking, and he said, you know, we just well get married. And she said, well, how are we going to sign the marriage certificate because you don't have a last name? And he said, well, I'll take yours. So that's how he became 4W Bill Pressler, because that was old Ma Pressler, as she was known around Newcastle. And then when he lived in the boarding house in Sundance, my dad always kept track of him. And so that time I was 3, Daddy said, we're going to go see 4W Bill over in Sundance, and we're going to take him out and buy him the biggest beefsteak we can. And he said he's living in a boarding house over there, and he said, I've been hearing from people in Sundance that they never see him downtown. And he said, I asked him, what's the matter? And he said, well, that damned old woman he lives with hides his hat. Because she said, if he has his hat, he runs off and goes uptown and gets drunk. And Dad said, I'm going to straighten that out. So when we got there, he went in the house and he got 4W, and he said, we're going to eat. And 4W said, okay. He said, I just hate like hell to go out without my hat. Dad marched into the other room, and I could hear him yelling. I was just 3 years old, and Mom in the car, and he was really swearing, and he didn't usually do that too much. And she said, well, by God, you better get it. Well, she said, it's out there in that shed in the back. He said, no, I'm not going to get it. You get right out there and get it yourself and get it in here. And he said she brought it, and it was all covered with cobwebs, and he beat it off on his pant leg, and he said, he poked her in the chest, and he said, I better never come over here one more time and find out he doesn't have his hat, and he can go uptown anytime you want to, and you're probably starving him to death around here, and I'm going to turn you in to the Humane Society if you ever pull a trick like that again. So Dad was a good advocate for those old cowboys. And there was another one called old Billy Riggin that lived around here, and he used to come out and stay in a sheep wagon we had, look after our place while we were gone in occasional times. And Dad was always buying them a meal, and that's what cowboys do for cowboys and cowgirls. So, any questions?
Thank you. Rob, did you have a presentation?
Yes, I do. Longest family of mine go back over 100 years.
I was about forgetting.
And I found this, and it's part of her family. It's a Napa bag, but it's not Napa.
Oh my goodness.
That belongs to your family.
Look at that. Sedgwick Hardware and Supply.
Oh my.
Now that was,
Newcastle spelled like that.
yes. And
Rhonda.
and that's
Turn it this way, we want to see it.
that's a tool bag. Or
Nail apron.
I think it's a nail apron. Yes, a nail apron. And that was Dad's uncle, Harry Sedgwick, and family had that. And they also had banks in Newcastle. And did you find anything, Neil?
You know, the only thing I found was this one.
Oh, that
on your book stand. But
yeah.
The albums, could they have been tucked way back under there?
Boy, I just can't imagine what he did with those after Bob brought them in.
Oh my God.
This is what I was going to tell you about the Weston County Fairgrounds. This is the rest of the story on Weston County Fairgrounds. This is the first photo, and I found it years and years ago in an antique store and bought it. And it is, Weinbrenner was a famous rodeo photographer back around Pendleton, Oregon. He took pictures of Pendleton, Oregon, Pendleton Roundup, Cheyenne Frontier Days, various places. So I said, and Weinbrenner, I had read about him. So, this says Frontier Days, Newcastle, Wyoming, Winebrenner, #1, and it's titled Just a Little Mix-Up. And this is that old Shell Hill. If you're at our fairgrounds and look back along the ridge, that's where that was, and that's where they bucked the first horses. But it is just a little mix-up because there's a bucking horse who has a number on his hip, and then there's a pickup man, which is the white horse, and apparently the horses' feet tangled with one another. So everybody went end over tea kettle, and then the pickup man's hat, I suppose, is flying way up here in the air because this bronc, there's a number 10 on his hip. So that indicates that has to be the bronc. This has to be the pickup man's horse. And that, I said Winebrenner was great with that old box camera.
Wow.
Or he'd have never caught the action of that hat so high in the air because they didn't have fast action cameras in that era. And this is a little scarf I picked up at Pendleton, Oregon that says Riding Cowboy, and I hung it on that. I keep it on my wall at my house. I kind of have a memory there, a museum. But this fellow has a cap. He's apparently a bystander. He's running out there to see if there's something he can do. And then my brother, who always had a great sense of humor, years after this, my family had rodeos, night rodeos at the Sunset Arena north of Newcastle. And he was always, my mom was 17 when she married my half-brother's dad. And then she was 40 when she married my dad. And her first husband was 15 years older than her, and her second husband was 10 years younger than her. And so they became best friends, and they were partners in these night rodeos north of Newcastle. So my brother R.C., while they had those night rodeos, we had some black cowboys that came along. And they had been raised by a Native American family over on the Rosebud. And they came over here and went to work. And they were big, good cowboys. And Jim Brooks was great tall, and Becky Harris was about this tall. And they were good bronc riders. So my brother, smart alecky, one day, he said, see that little white spot there? He said, that's old Jim Brooks' eye shining out. He always shows the light of his eye. He said, he must have been the one that was on that bronc. Maybe he got reincarnated. So that's your little dose of cowboy humor for the day.
His tail goes up, too.
Yeah, his tail, it shows the action.
Yeah.
You know, I said, for the cameras in that era.
That's amazing.
And Winebrenner took a lot of photos at Cheyenne Frontier Days and Pendleton Roundup and stuff, so.
But I want to hear about your riding. I know you rode and rode and rode, and I want to hear about that, some of it.
Well, like I said, we were privileged to do those long days on the Fiddleback and the 4W. And when my husband's parents were elderly, they lived with us, Billy and Evelyn Stearns. And so, who lived down there near the Cheyenne River. My husband went to school in Dewey, South Dakota, which wasn't that far, and rode back and forth to school. So they would go with us and stay in the bunkhouses, or we had a motorhome. And there were beds in there, and a refrigerator, and an air conditioner. Particularly at the Fiddleback, no one lived at the old place, but they did have electricity there. So we'd fill the water tank on the motorhome, and we'd park it out not too far from the bunkhouse, probably within 30 yards or so, and then we would sleep in our cowboy teepee. We had a cowboy teepee with cots and bedrolls, and so we'd sleep in there, and we could hear them if they were moving at night in that motorhome, or we'd hear them talking or anything, and one of us would get up and go see if everything was all right. Then we'd get up in the morning and we'd leave snacks ready that they could just open the refrigerator door, and they had the toilet they could flush and water it around in the sink, and cold drinks in the fridge. And we'd take off and maybe leave at 3:30 or 4 o'clock anytime it was daylight. And then we'd come back probably 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and they would have had some lunch. We might not get in till 5 in the afternoon, but our horses would be tuckered, and we'd have to come back to change horses, and even if we rode them later on. But they absolutely loved being out there because Mother Stearns had taught school on the south side of the Cheyenne River when she was young, and she made enough money to buy some sheep, and she trailed them all by herself from there to over by Custer, South Dakota. Took her about 2 days with a horse and a dog, and she had leased some pasture, summer pasture, from some family she had over there out of Custer, so she trailed those sheep over there. So she was a Cheyenne River cowgirl too, and Father was 93, 91, 92, 93, 94, probably during the years we worked there on the Fiddleback and the 4W, and they would go and be with us in those motorhomes, and we could stay in the bunkhouse when Will and I, when we worked for the 4W, but they'd be anxious to hear every night, well, where'd you ride today? And what did you see? And so forth. And then our daughter, my husband's daughter, their granddaughter, still teaches school in Arizona at Flagstaff, and she would come for summer vacation, and so she'd get horseback with us, and then and go and ride the big days with us, and then tell Grandma and Grandpa, you know, ask them a lot of questions when she came in at night about the area that she'd been in. And then Billy said, I can ride that gray mare of yours if you've got to work any cattle in the pens. And we looked at each other and went, wow. And he was 92 and 93 and even into 94 when he did that, I think. And we knew how gentle she was. She was a good quarter horse mare, and she was quiet and calm, and he was quiet and calm. And he'd get on, and we'd take the stirrups up for him on a comfortable saddle of mine, and he'd ride into the herd quiet as a mouse. You know, so many people don't know how to work cattle, and he just grew up doing it, and he was the best cattle worker we had. We'd just say, we'll hold the herd, and he never spooked him out. I mean, he'd say, I see that one there's over nursing, I'll pull that pair out and push them over, and we'd take them and put them off, you know, into another pen or into another bunch. And that little old man just had the greatest joy out of doing that. And Evelyn was kind of, had her nose out of joint because we didn't let her ride. We just had one really gentle horse. We were always breaking and training some younger horses. So, yes.
Rhonda, your apron you got said Segment Hardware. Mm-hmm. Do you know anything about that hardware store?
Yes, it belonged to my dad's cousins, I'm pretty sure. And Harry Sedgwick and one of his brothers, I think, maybe, and it was, where it was located is where the Masonic building is now, just south of the intersection and on that side of the road. I think there used to be an antique store underneath it, maybe there is one yet, and next to the sewing center, just kind of right there.
What I was told, it was where, in the basement where A1 Agency is.
Well, it was early, I believe. And, yes, and then that became Culver's Lumber, didn't it?
Well, I don't know about
after
that.
The Sedgwicks.
But my dad bought a sheep wagon. They made sheep wagons there too.
That's right.
And he bought a sheep wagon there in the late 30s. And when they went out of the sheep business, he sold it to Chris Christensen, and it sat there in Russ's yard for 40 years, just rotted away. And Chris's granddaughter, and they rebuilt it. It's over to Casper.
And Chris and Russ Christensen are some of the Cowboys we spoke about.
So they did build sheep wagons there too. And I think Foamings had a hardware store, and they might have helped build a sheep wagon too, or work for it.
Who had the
Foamings.
Foamings.
I think
okay, yes. And that would have been before Munkers had the funeral home, I think.
Oh yeah, I think so.
And then, now it's A1 Agency in that building. So it has lots of history. Yeah, we really, our communities make a mark, leave a mark on us, and I guess we leave a mark on our communities. Yes, ma'am.
Rhonda, so you're Rhonda Sedgwick?
Mm-hmm.
And you were like Miss Wyoming or Miss Rodeo Wyoming? Which one?
I was national, I was state and national high school rodeo queen when I was 14. And that was in Hot Springs, South Dakota. And I I had a 3-year-old horse that my dad had bought in Denver when he was 2, and he was a grandson of King and a grandson of Leo. And if you know anything about horse pedigrees, those are 2 of the royal bloodlines that are back very, very early in quarter horse business, and roots of today's quarter horses. You'll see a Leo or a King in a lot of horses' names these days. And he was a stallion, a 2-year-old coming 3-year-old stallion, and we were at the National Western Stock Show. We always went in Denver. In fact, we exhibited some Palomino horses there because my granddad Cedric, he had thoroughbred mares, and Dad kept some of them, and then he bought the first quarter horse stallion that ever came to this area, which was called Steamboat Eddie, and he was gold, absolutely gold buckskin, with a black mane and tail and glass eyes. His eyes were blue, about the color of these ribbons. And so Dad was really tickled to buy this horse at the National Western Stock Show. And no, he didn't buy him there. He bought him from an old man in a little town just north of Greeley, Colorado, because he had cousins and family in Greeley and uncles and aunts. And he bought that horse and brought him here and started crossbreeding him on the thoroughbred mares that he had brought from his inheritance when he left the ranch and moved up to Mush Creek and bought the McCain place. So they started those sorrel mares, and that buckskin stallion began to have Palomino horses, and they're golden with white tails and manes. And they're just beautiful, and we'd never hardly seen one except at the state fair when people were exhibiting them. And we had no idea that the cross of gold buckskin and a sorrel would bring that color, but it was really fortuitous for us because they were a hot thing on the market. And so we sold a lot of Palominos. We'd take them to the National Western Stock Show sale, and they would bring good money. And we exhibited them down there at halter shows and at the Wyoming State Fair, and that let people know, and they began to call and ask about that. And then I just think God blessed us with horses over the years, because later on we had a really good, we went to Arizona in the winter times, and we'd shop along the way for horses, and we bought a couple of young mares at a Randall's ranch in New Mexico. And Jimmy Randall's was all over the quarter horse journals with his horses. They were Pocodell bred horses when the Pocos for Poco Bueno. Pocodell was a grandson of Poco Bueno. So we bought a sorrel mare and a roan mare, which I just loved, and broke them both and showed them at halter and in several different performance events. And then when they got a little older, Dad said that Maggie, we called her, Poco Maggie. She said that Maggie mare's really got a good looking rear end and everything on her. He said, I'm going to try to find a kind of a trim horse, and over here in the Black Hills we knew somebody that had a stallion, and Harley Roth, and so we went and had a breeding to that stallion, and we were so excited for this foal to be born because it was really going to be good bloodlines, and we thought we'd have a champion. And we were watching, and we went to the barn real early one morning to check on her. And I think it was Mom maybe that went out. It was either Mom or I, and we came flying back to the house yelling, "Get out, come look, you'll never believe it, she had an Appaloosa." It was sorrel. And great big white blanket came clear up past his flanks, and big red spots in it, and just a little bit of roan on his face. His head was dark. Appaloosas sometimes get too much white around the eyes, and you have to be careful they don't sunburn in the summer and stuff. So I said, I think the horse gods just blessed us, because here we got that buckskin horse we didn't even believe we'd get, and he was popular, and then got that Appaloosa crop out. And of course, Dad only bred a few mares to that horse, and then gelded him because I was training him for rodeo. And so he turned out to be this horse that I won the National High School pole vaulting on when he was 3 and I was 14, and I was also in the Queen contest that year, and I won the Queen contest. And that was in Hot Springs, South Dakota. So I was flabbergasted. Here I am with the national championship and queen, and then I traveled around to all the high school rodeos representing Wyoming. I needed to be at most of the ones around the state, and he still ran poles and barrels, but he set a national record. The next year was the national was in Valentine, Nebraska, and I think he had run the 5 poles in 18.5 or 6 over in Hot Springs, and the next year in Valentine he ran them in 18.3, and that was another record, a 17.3. 17.3. They were 5 poles, and now they run 6. And if you get an 18, it's really fast, and they are really fast. With 6 poles, but that was 5 poles, 18 feet apart. Now there's 6 poles, 21 feet apart. But it was national record, and it stood for a long, long time. And so those were parts of the reasons, all of those things happening. And then I roped calves, breakaway roped on him, and I ran barrels and poles, and then I also showed him in quarter horse shows, and he was register merit in 5 different events, which means that's really high. You go into the National Quarter Horse Museum in Amarillo, Texas, and you walk in and there's tiles on the walls for trainers in the 2005, 6, 7, 8, 10 that were for Colorado and Arizona and different states that I showed against all the time. And every once in a while I beat them in senior rating or Western riding or pole. Always, they didn't run poles, they just did the cattle events and so forth. But you know, we just couldn't believe our fortune in rodeo, and I guess it was just my destiny. So I can only praise God.
Rhonda, if I could ask you, I want to ask you 2 questions. I'll do the first one. I recognize that your family loved Palomino horses.
Yes.
And I know there's a story about Vi Sedgwick and her favorite Palomino horse at Newcastle.
Oh,
Can
yeah.
you tell that story?
Oh, yes, that is a funny one. My mom was very possessive of her horses, and Miss America, not Miss Rodeo America. One year during the Weston County Fair, Miss America visited Newcastle. A lot of you may remember when that happened. And so the town fathers, I think the mayor, and it could have been Ty Thomas, and he was my half-brother's ex-father-in-law. I think it was Ty. And he said, oh, we want you to ride in the parade, and you need to ride a Palomino horse, and you can ride Violet Sedgwick's Palomino mare. And so she was out there and came to the fairgrounds and said, where is my Palomino horse who's named Sedgwick around here? And the mayor said, I can ride this Palomino horse in the parade. And my mother said, I'll have you to know that's my horse. And if you think you're going to ride my horse, do you have a saddle? Nope. Well, he said I could ride your saddle. My mother said, well, I tell you something, young lady. You will have to consult me before you come barging in here and saying you're going to use my horse and saddle and ride the parade. And Dad was kind of tugging on her shirt tail, you know, and he said, Violet, shh, it'll be okay. She said, it'll be okay, but she's going to ask me. Now, young lady, she said, Mrs. What's your name? Mrs. Sedgwick, could I please ride your horse in the parade today? And Mother said, well, that's a little more like it, and I guess you can. If we can get the stirrups adjusted to fit your feet and everything. So she was just sitting up there, you know, holding onto the saddle horn, and beautiful down the street, and Mama's mare was very well behaved, and she'd been in parades before.
The ones that start slow, but boy, by mid-season, you see something, and by the end of the year, they're the scary team nobody wants to play. Those are more fun than the teams that come in that you know are going to dominate, and they are dominating. You know, you're almost afraid to lose when you've got really, really good teams and high expectations.
Oh, for sure.
Those are fun seasons. Is there that potential in Dogie Sports this year for some of those programs?
I think it's possible. You know, Cody coming down into 3A,
this year is going to scare quite a few of us old 3A'ers, but we do have that potential for growth. We are not coming in at the beginning of the season at our highest potential, which frankly, you don't want. You want your team to grow. You want your team to develop and then get to that point by the end of the season to have that shot at postseason play.
I rode Mama's horse without asking, and that's the way most cowboys are. I'll let you ride my horse, but you'll ask me first.
So,
yes.
Did you tell us about the little 3-year-old boy that you were talking about? Do you know what happened to him?
Yes, that was he became 4W Bill. He's this old man. That was really him. And we heard the 2 different stories, and they all matched up together.
Wow.
And then
I was wondering how you knew.
Then he got his Pressler name from Mary.
So you really
Ma
never
Pressler.
found out where he came from. Yeah, that's what.
We just knew that he was picked up along the trail somewhere in the Deep South, and those Longhorns were known to come out of Texas country, and there was a well-established cattle trail up through Colorado and Kansas.
And some cowboy just carried him on the saddle with him?
They found him asleep in their chuck wagon or on their chuck wagon. One story said he was asleep on the seat of the chuck wagon, and another said that he wandered into camp about the time they started breakfast fire and said, please don't make me leave. Please don't hurt me. I'm so hungry and so cold. And they said his feet were just bloody. And that was truly him. And then this Bill Hilscher, that this lady came to the rodeo later, she said, well, that was my dad, and he was on that trail drive, and that's just what happened. But he said the kid was asleep on the wagon seat.
And they never found out where he came from except that he just appeared.
And we talked to him about that, and he said, nope. He said, this is the only home I've known, right here at the 4W. So, yes.
I'm going to ask the second question if I can. I'm going to be careful as I do this, but all of us recognize that you're an outstanding cowgirl, and you have a lot of awards. And I remember at a time that I talked with you that there was one award that you didn't receive. You were not to detract from your awards, but you didn't receive the Weston County Award. Isn't that correct?
Yes, yes. I never competed in a rodeo queen contest in Weston County. I put on a lot of clinics and I judged a lot of contests, but by the time I had, I don't know that Weston County was, I think I helped maybe get the Weston County Rodeo Queen Contest started. And I taught horsemanship for years at the Weston County Fairgrounds, and I taught a lot of young girls horsemanship, and then also encouraged them later to, first of all, compete in the junior rodeo and to show their horses in the county fair, and then go on. And some of them did very well and went on with a lot of different things. But also the queen contest, I would always help coach, and I loaned a lot of clothes to a lot of women that were like 18, 19 years old who were going to the national competition, because when I went to Miss Rodeo America, and that is another story, that was 1963, and we were in the arena competing in horsemanship in Las Vegas, Nevada, when Robert Kennedy was killed. John Kennedy was killed.
The reason that I bring that up is I remember talking with you at one time that you had won so many awards, but it was difficult for you to win the award in your own hometown.
Yes.
I mean you were still...
Well, and that was true with the all-around cowgirl, at the all-around cowgirl at the Weston County Fair. I never did win the all-around cowgirl at the Weston County Fair. I had won national championships everywhere else, and I said, I think I must get too nervous when I come here, because I was using the same horse. I'd knock a pole down, or I'd knock a barrel down, or I'd miss my calf. You know, it was just kind of hard to compete in front of all the people that you've known for so many years, and I guess I just pressured up. And my horses really feel that if you're pressuring up, and so that's true. And but I just said I was exceedingly abundantly blessed, and then And the greatest thing was that in my quarter horse thing, that my General Leo horse is listed in a book about the outstanding quarter horses over many, many years. And it's a book that was put out by someone who was looking up records in the quarter horse industry, and he's register merit in 5 events, which means he's really an all-around horse. You know, that was poles, barrels, reining, working cow horse, something else. Oh, and I even showed him in English in jumping over at Douglas State Fair one year. I had gotten an English saddle and from a friend over in South Dakota, and she had taught me to ride it a little, and then I got some jumps and started practicing, and that was the only time I ever did anything like that, and I said that was a little too much. And my dad, I have a funny story about Dad. He said we built some jumps. We had this little arena made out of snow fence at the ranch, and he later built a really nice one out of welded pipe before we left the ranch. But he was training some horses too, and Dad was 6'4", and we were training on some 3-year-olds, and they weren't very big. And of course, he was really long-legged, and so he was a little overbalanced on these young horses. And so we were going around, and we'd come to these jumps and jump them, and go to another one and jump it. And so Dad was coming up. I'd gone ahead of him, my horse had jumped, and the next one will usually follow. But this colt got scared. It was just about a 3-year-old, and when he got there, and my dad was so tall and so big over this horse, he came right up to the jump and slammed the brakes on, and my dad went over the jump on his shoulders and I thought, oh my God, he might have broken his neck, because he lay there for a minute, and it just scared me to death. And I couldn't laugh until afterwards, you know. And Dad said, he got up and dusted his hat off on his pants, and he said, "To hell with this jumping, I'm not going to do that anymore." But it was really difficult for me. I said, I have all kinds of respect for English riders, yeah. And another funny thing that Dad did, I'm just boring you guys. National Appaloosa Show in Syracuse, New York. Laura Boggio, she had been Laura Sordahl, and we'd gotten into the Appaloosas, and she's the one that gave me the English saddle and got me to riding English and jumping the Appaloosas for her, because she was very heavy in her old age. She'd won everything in the world with those horses, but she got really heavy. She was this big through the hips, and she just couldn't sit in a saddle and ride a horse. A horse just couldn't carry her. And she said, "Rhonda, I want to coach you. You come over to Rapid and stay with me, and I'll coach you on these horses, and I'll tell you what to do and how to get them to do the things." And so I learned massive amounts of horse knowledge from her. And she said, "I can't ride him anymore." And so she taught me how to teach him to jump and do all these things. And so there were 2 funny things about going to Syracuse, New York. One thing was somebody came running up to me and they said, "Oh, you must be Laura Sordahl. I'm so glad to meet you." And I said, "Well, thank you very much." I said, "But I can't claim to have the glory that lady has. I'm just one of her humble proteges." And she said, "Oh, well, then where is she?" And I said, "That's her over there." And they said, "She rides jumping horses." And the other thing was that my dad, she then got me to showing in Appaloosa costume classes, which you dress up like an Indian, sometimes pull a travois, elaborate costumes of beadwork and everything. And she had this gorgeous outfit, and she said, "I want you to show this horse. We're going for all-around champion, because he's our stallion. I want you to show him in Syracuse, New York." And it was 110 and 111 on the streets, and the humidity was, I just couldn't hardly breathe. I couldn't hardly think. And so anyway, I was warming up in the arena, getting ready for my class, and Dad knew it was so hot, so he went and got a Coke at the concession stand and came out to the practice arena and stood there with his Coke. And he was watching, and there were 3 or 4 costume people warming up. And I had all this black makeup and brown makeup and all the clothes of Laura's, which he hadn't seen. So I passed him 3 times. He was standing here, you know, with his coat. And I just couldn't resist. I'd come around the corner and I'd be watching straight ahead, you know, and I'd just drive right straight past him. And I'd see he was going like, and I finally stopped right in front of him and I said, "Are you ever going to give me that coat?" "Oh hell! Why didn't you tell me that was you?" I said, "Well, I'm almost famished. I just couldn't tease you any longer." So we had a lot of fun, but it's just been a privileged and blessed life, and I have to give all the credit to God. There was no way that we could have had the miraculous horses we had and the things that happened. And that's the way, you know, it is with all of us. We just depend on the grace of God, and it sees us through things. And all the miles we traveled and the nights that we drove when my husband and I were senior pro rodeo, and we'd drive all night to get to rodeos, and then I'd sleep while he rode his broncs, and then we'd get up and go to another one, and traveled all over the United States. But his mother and father and son and daughter were able to be with us at Reno when he won one of his world championships. And his dad and mom had hardly seen him ride because there weren't many ones around here locally. And he wasn't even going to join the senior pros, and we were doing day work on the Cheyenne River for somebody, and they called from the Douglas Senior Pro Rodeo and they said, "Hey, somebody said Bill Stearns works there." And they said, "Yes, he does. Did you want to?" He's not out here. He's out working, but his wife is here. So they talked to me and they said, "Listen, you tell that Stearns to get his bronc saddle and get in here to Douglas, because we don't have enough saddle bronc riders to make a competition. We have to have at least 3, or the rodeo producer won't bring a bronc, or we have to have at least 4 or something." And said, "We've already got him entered and paid his entry fees, and so tell the boss he's going to have the afternoon off." And I said, "Well, I don't think he can get the afternoon off, but it's a night rodeo, isn't it?" And they said yes, and said all the Cowboys will be there to help him get his saddle ready and everything. And so when I told him, he said, "Gee whiz," he said, "it hasn't been out of the rigging bag for months, and skirts will be all curled up and everything." He usually saddle soap it and get it all ready beforehand. But anyway, went in there and competed and placed. And like I said, that photo of him riding when he was 65 is to me, you know, just marvelous, because his style was in perfection. But it was generations of cowboys, cowgirls behind him. So.
Rhonda, thank you very much.
You've been a marvelous audience. Did you have another question?
One that I do, real quick. When I lived in Laramie 20 years ago, I met a gentleman who'd been a cowboy rancher around Laramie all his life. He got to the point where he couldn't rodeo, he couldn't ride anymore, so he became a leatherman. He had a leather shop there that was delightful to walk into. He made all of the leather costumes for the ladies at Cheyenne
Frontier Day.
And I wondered, what did you wear when you were the queen?
Yes.
And who made it?
Actually, the Cheyenne Frontier Days girls and the Pendleton Roundup girls were the only ones who wore the leather costumes,
the buckskins,
and the buckskins, and the divided riding skirts. So glitter was in when I was in when I was in Miss Rodeo America competition. We got Miss Rodeo Wyoming gave me a suit as one of my prizes. It was $100, and at that time it was $150 was a fortune. There was a $150 tailored suit by Gross, who's the north end of Denver. They were Gross tailors, and they made men's wear and women's wear, western wear, the finest. And so it was a wool silk blend in a dark green that kind of twinged to brown, and I could accessorize it with different colors. And then my mother met a trick rider along our days of rodeoing named Edna Ramsey from Riverton. And she was a seamstress, and she sewed all of her own outfits. And she had glitz and glitter and glamour, and Mother said, I'm going to meet that lady. And I said, well, I want to meet her too. She's amazing. And so when Mom went to meet her, she said, where do you get your outfits? She said, oh, I just make them. I've got a sewing machine, and I keep it in the trailer house, and when we're traveling in between rodeos, I just sew up a few. And Mom went, and she said, where do you get this? Brocade was in at that time. So I had turquoise with gold brocade, and gold with black stitching brocade suits that were just out of this world, and was wearing them at that Miss Rodeo America competition when I was in Reno when Kennedy was killed. And that, we were getting ready. We had 2 go-arounds of horsemanship, and you had to draw for your horses. And there was a tall Palomino horse that was a picket man's horse, and there was a shorter sorrel horse that belonged to a mounted patrol guy who rode quadrilles and things. And he wasn't, picket man's horses are just, boy, they will really handle and move at the touch of a leg, and cowboy horses. And quadrille horses those guys were more dudes, and their horsemanship wasn't as good. So we drew, you draw numbers for your horses. Well, there was a big tall girl from Kansas. She towered over me like this, and she was a good hand. But we reached in a bucket and each pulled out, we would draw 2 at a time, and we reached in this bucket and we each pulled a number. And I looked, and I had number 2, and she had number 5 or whatever it was. And I said to our hostesses that were always with us, our chaperone ladies, which horse is 2? And she said the Palomino, because they'd been going, 2 girls would ride them and then they'd come again. So I went, thank God. But she's so tall, she can really get on, and I'm going to, lead in the seat of the pants, have to jump for the stirrup, and I might not make it. But I'm just really glad I got that horse, because he'll really make me look good. Well, we walked up to take our horse, and she was ahead of me, and she took the bridle reins of the Palomino horse and led him out in the arena and got on him. Oh. And I went. So the chaperones said, I said, you told us to tell you if there were any issues, and she really, I mean, here's the number. That's the horse she took. And they said, we thought so, but just don't say anything about it. And I said, well, I'm really kind of tickled, because that little short horse is going to make me look a lot better getting on. So she was pretty confident she was going to win the horsemanship, and I beat her. So I thought, well, I guess that is, justice that always pays to tell the truth and do the right thing. But while we were in that arena, about the time I was riding, there was this kind of a roar started to go around in this big coliseum. I mean, you could just hear this mumble, and then it got louder and louder and louder and was going around, and I thought, well, they're sure not doing that about me, because I'm not doing that good. And I looked up, and people were standing up, and people were going to the aisles and getting down, and I thought, goodness gracious sakes. So we got back, and I went to our chaperones, and several of us came and said, what's going on? And they said, everything's fine. Just keep calm. You have to finish your round here. Everything's under control. We're safe. And so we knew. And then they still didn't tell us. So we get on the bus. We go back to the Sahara Hotel where we stay. All of the black staff that worked in the Sahara Hotel were running up and down the halls, weeping and holding each other and having a fit. And the chaperones were hurting us and said, we're going to the breakfast room where we eat, and we want you all to come in there. We have to tell you something. And they said, Kennedy's been shot.
November 22nd, 1963.
Yeah. And that was the day, and I just get chills, thinking about it now, because we had no idea, and they knew that they didn't dare let us know, but we knew by the way that people were just filing out of there, and people were, and I was so impressed that the black help were all just weeping. They just loved him. And I would never have known that if I hadn't been there, because we just weren't around that many black people in this part of the country. But it was certainly, and then our chaperones talked to us. And we were all crying and upset, and they said, you know, we're going to sit as long with you girls as you want to tonight. We can just set up and have a cocoa party and cookies and talk until you just can't stay up any longer and want to go to your rooms and sleep, because you all have to continue to compete tomorrow. And but it was really a shock to us all, and we couldn't believe that thing happened. And then she actually didn't even, I think she got third runner-up or something and I believe she would have won it if she hadn't cheated about the horse, you know, the girlfriend, the big tall girlfriend Kansas. But it's the way things work. So, yeah, your route with horses takes you a lot of different places and into a lot of different situations. So, thank you. You've been so wonderful. I just kept you there all afternoon.